Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. In this next, few segments, there's a lot to cover, including, hey, we had World Freedom of the Press Day, which is always exciting because, hey, we're a group of journalists, cameramen, photojournalists, and alike that we like the idea of celebrating our freedom, and our global allowance to express ourselves through our art and the messages that we capture. Protecting the right for all journalists to be free and to be free of harassment, the freedom of that we have here in Canada, that we don't have to worry about if we say something against the government, that we're not going to get stuck in jail, or if we put something out on social media, that our government doesn't use algorithms and surveillance to entrap us so that we cannot be heard. It is, in a lot of respects, equal opportunity, and in some respects, there needs to be more work done to ensure that independent media can be seen equally as well as our corporate mass media partners. With that being said, let's move on to information. And information, we on a national level, we start to talk about CSIS. There is a political football out there. Justin Trudeau is, in a briefing on Parliament Hill, he's going to say that the Liberal caucus did not receive information from CSIS about Michael Chung possibly in being in danger over a genocide motion sponsored by this Conservative MP in 2021. That CSIS just kind of filed it away because they didn't think it was a viable threat. Now that this has all come to light, Justin Trudeau is saying that if any MP's life is in danger, that no matter how small or large CSIS thinks that threat could be, that they are supposed to report it. Of course, Pierre Poilievre is going on the attack with this, where he's saying that the Liberal government had to have already known because, well, they were in charge. They saying that it's a Liberal government, by his own words, it's a Liberal government saying that they weren't in charge, that they're kind of a puppet to something else, that they weren't privy to the information. So there's a political football in effect over, was Michael Chung's life and his family's life in danger over a genocide motion involving China? Was his life put in danger over that? And, well, as a result, CSIS is now being told that if any MP, no matter what, the level of threat is, or how credible they think the threat is, that they are supposed to report it to the Prime Minister's office. So, with that, there is our next couple segments after that. Of course, it involves freedom of the press and how freedom of press should be observed around the world, and that there shouldn't be any backlash for reporting the truth as seen by journalists. That journalists should be free to put the information out there so that anyone can see it. With that, let's talk about inclusion versus exclusion, and how there are some things that, in order to smooth the waters and to ensure that human rights are observed, that human rights can be the best antidote to inequalities and unaddressed grievances and exclusion. And this was actually discussed on the UN Security Council by Volker Türk, as he addressed inequities that happen around the world. Quote, Türk said that a unwavering human rights lens and a strong human rights action based on norms tried and tested lead us away from chaos and conflict and advance development and build trust. That is a strong quote, and let's leave it at that as we head into today's segments and celebrate World Press Freedom Day. So, here we go.
Prime Minister, can you please clarify when exactly you were first told about MP Michael Chong and China's targeting of him and his family?
Over the past couple of days, we've done a lot of follow-up to find out exactly what happened and where various people knew at different points in the system. We all knew after the genocide motion that China made a public thing about sanctioning Michael Chong 2 years ago because of his strong leadership on condemning the violence against the Uyghurs. CSIS made a determination at that point that they should give Michael defensive briefings, which they did over the following years a number of times on issues surrounding this concern that China had and engagement. On Monday morning, 2 days ago, we asked what happened to that information. Was it ever briefed up out of CSIS? It was not. CSIS made the determination that it wasn't something that needed to be raised to a higher level because it wasn't a significant enough concern. That's why they chose to give direct defensive briefings to the MP in question, but they didn't feel that it was necessary to do anything else. Going forward, we're making it very, very clear to CSIS and all our intelligence officials that when there are concerns that talk specifically about any MP, particularly about their family, those need to be elevated, even if CSIS doesn't feel that it's a sufficient level of concern for them to take more direct action. We still need to know about it at the upper government levels.
When did you make that directive?
When did you learn about it?
We are making that directive now. We are making it clear to CSIS that when it involves an MP, even if it's not hitting a threshold that they would previously think needs to be highlighted, we should still know about
it. When did you learn specifically about this information about Mr. Chong?
I learned that following the media reports on Monday morning. I asked CSIS, what is this briefing? What is this supposed story that is out in the media from a leak? What do we know about it? We then retraced over the past couple of days what this was, that CSIS knew about certain things, didn't feel that it reached a threshold that required them to pass it up out of CSIS or give more than just a defensive briefing to Mr. Chong a few months later and then repeat in. But obviously, when it comes to an MP's safety, when it comes to their family's safety, we need to know, even if it's a mild concern or something that wouldn't otherwise hit a threshold that CSIS would feel it needs to be worked on.
Ce soir alimente ces perceptions d'influence de Pékin sur votre gouvernement.
Je pense que mon frère va pouvoir très bien expliquer ce qui s'est passé et sa perspective, et les gens vont voir très clairement que au sujet de la Fondation Trudeau, je n'ai pas d'engagement direct ou indirect.
Est-ce que vous l'avez passé?
Non, je n'ai pas parlé depuis plusieurs semaines.
Russia's claiming that Ukraine attempted to kill Putin and assassinate him. Any comment on that?
We very much know how Russia chooses to share and link anything that happens to nefarious plots against them. We're obviously watching very closely to see. We're talking with intelligence agencies and partners to find out exactly what's going on. I think we need to be concerned, obviously, about anything that's happening around this, but we're not going to jump to any conclusions at this particular moment.
How will threats against an MP's family not be taken seriously?
CSIS receives a tremendous amount of information all the time about what various consular officials are doing or what various foreign interference actors are engaged in. They constantly make decisions around what is a credible threat, what is a non-credible threat. They are professionals who make that evaluation. And what I'm saying is, even if it's a less than threshold threat, according to their views, if it regards an MP or an MP's family, it should be passed up going forward to a political level.
Just to clarify, you only found out Monday morning? You didn't know 2 years ago? 2 years ago, I knew that China had sanctioned Michael Chong because, and that they were very unhappy with him because of his leadership. That I found about like everyone else through the public reporting on Monday, and asked CSIS to ask for more information, and that's what we've been gathering over the past days. If anyone ever were to, or ever puts a threat against an MP or a family, we need to know about it, and we're going to make sure that CSIS elevates that, even if it's not a credible threat or doesn't hit the threshold that they would decide is necessary. When it comes to MPs and their families, I think we have to have a lower threshold. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Justin Trudeau est en vacances encore. Il ne veut pas répondre à mes questions, donc il ne sera pas aux périodes de questions, même si c'est la période de questions du premier ministre. Mais on sait pourquoi. Il ne veut pas répondre aux questions par rapport à sa connaissance d'une menace contre la famille d'un député conservateur pendant 2 ans, que ses services de renseignement étaient au courant de ces menaces-là, que Justin Trudeau n'a rien fait pour expulser l'agent de Pékin qui était en arrière de ces menaces-là. Il ne veut pas répondre aux questions par rapport aux 140 000 $ que Pékin a donné à la Fondation Trudeau afin d'influencer la famille Trudeau et le gouvernement Trudeau, un don qui a été facilité par son frère. Il ne veut pas répondre aux questions par rapport aux 1 sur 5 Canadiens qui doivent qui doivent manquer des repas parce qu'ils ne peuvent pas payer le prix d'épicerie à cause de l'inflation et la taxe carbone. Il est incapable de répondre aux questions par rapport à son interdiction des armes de chasse, en même temps qu'il permet des criminels de sortir dans les rues pour tuer des gens. Justin Trudeau ne veut pas faire le travail. Il est déconnecté des Canadiens. Il se donne une autre vacance lorsque les Canadiens sont en train de souffrir avec un gouvernement qui est brisé. So, Justin Trudeau's on vacation again. What do you know? Today is Prime Minister's question period, the day where he's supposed to show up and answer my questions, but he's running away. And why wouldn't he? He doesn't want to answer about why his government knew for 2 years, since July of 2021, that a foreign agent was in this country threatening the family of a Canadian MP, and that he did absolutely nothing. He didn't kick the foreign agent out. He didn't inform the MP. He did nothing to protect the family. Now he's interested in protecting himself. He doesn't want to answer questions about the Trudeau Family Foundation that got $140,000 from the dictatorship in Beijing, specifically to influence him, a donation facilitated by his very own brother, who's testifying. Trudeau doesn't want to answer questions about the fact that he's trying to ban the hunting rifles of Grandpa Joe, instead of going after the repeat violent killers who are stabbing and shooting up our streets. He doesn't want to answer about how his carbon tax is driving 1 in 5 Canadians to skip meals and 1.5 million to go to food banks. What do you know? Justin has given himself the day off again. Imagine if everyday Canadians did what he did. If you're a waitress and you don't show up for work, you're fired. If you're a barber, you don't show up for work, you're fired. If you're Justin Trudeau, you don't show up for work, you get a taxpayer-funded vacation. Canadians are out of money. Trudeau is out of touch, and I suspect very soon he'll be out of the country again.
What are the next steps with the Michael Chong situation? He raised a question of privilege yesterday in the House of Commons. The Speaker is examining that. Are you looking for any further investigation into who knew what when, because the Public Safety Minister and the Prime Minister haven't been clear about when exactly they learned of this?
We want the Public Safety Minister to tell us when he knew, and when any other members of the Liberal Cabinet know. When did Bill Blair know? He had been Public Safety Minister. When did the Prime Minister in his office know? I find it very hard to believe that CSIS would produce a document about a Canadian MP's family being threatened because of a vote on the floor of the House of Commons, and that they wouldn't tell the Prime Minister or his top Public Safety Minister. This is insane. You know, if any one of you were to threaten the family of an MP because of a vote in the House of Commons, you'd be in jail. This guy's not only not in jail, he's in Canada with diplomatic immunity. Immunity granted him by Justin Trudeau. Trudeau's not only keeping this agent in our country, by credentialing him, he's giving him diplomatic immunity, which means he could not be prosecuted under criminal code provisions the same way any other Canadian would be. In other words, this person has a higher status above the law in our country than anyone who's a citizen of Canada, because Trudeau credentials him.
Quelle preuve vous avez que M. Trudeau savait il y a 2 ans? Vous dites M. Trudeau savait il y a 2 ans, il n'a rien fait, mais on n'a pas de preuve de ça. Quelle preuve vous avez que lui savait?
L'a-t-il nié? L'a-t-il nié?
Je vous pose la question.
L'a-t-il nié? Non, attends. J'ai dit que...
Je ne parle pas de la réponse de M. Trudeau, je parle de votre attaque. Quelle preuve avez-vous qu'il le savait il y a 2 ans?
Premièrement, il n'y a pas d'attaque. On sait que le gouvernement Trudeau savait. Ça, c'est un fait. Le gouvernement Trudeau savait. On a 48 heures depuis que l'article est dans le Globe and Mail. Il n'a pas nié savoir. On a posé la question à son ministre de la Sécurité publique hier à la Chambre des communes, une dizaine de fois. Il n'a pas répondu. Qu'est-ce qu'il a à cacher? Et finalement, si Justin Trudeau n'a rien caché, il sera aux périodes de questions.
Qu'est-ce que vous attendez
that this problem lies with the Prime Minister cabinet? What makes you think it's not CSIS perhaps didn't have the right protocol, or they didn't see fit to inform Mr. Chong himself?
Has the Prime Minister said that CSIS withheld this information from him? Because you want to know what proof? Justin Trudeau's own Chief of Staff said nothing is withheld from the Prime Minister, and that he reads everything he gets. So based on her testimony at a parliamentary committee, we should believe that CSIS would have brought this to the Prime Minister's attention. I can't fathom the thought that an intelligence agency would know of a threat against an MP's family because of a vote conducted in the House of Commons and wouldn't tell the Prime Minister that. If that's the case, then he's not actually running the government. He's just a figurehead, and he's not doing his job.
Vous avez pris note du témoignage d'Alexandre Trudeau cet après-midi concernant la Fondation Trudeau.
Oui.
M. Trudeau lui dit, il n'y a pas de lien, c'est mon frère, je l'aime beaucoup, mais il fait ses affaires, je fais les miennes. Est-ce que vous voyez un lien entre les deux?
Oui, ils sont des frères. Mais écoutez, revenons sur les faits. Les services de renseignement ont dit que la raison pour laquelle la Chine a versé le 140 000 $ à la Fondation Trudeau, c'était pour influencer Justin Trudeau. Qui a facilité le don? Le frère de Justin Trudeau. C'est tout dans la famille Trudeau. C'est l'argent étranger visé à influencer notre premier ministre, et c'est le temps pour la transparence, parce que le premier ministre devrait travailler pour nous et non pas pour ceux qui donnent de l'argent à la Fondation Trudeau. Et finalement, Fondation Trudeau, les 2 enquêteurs que Trudeau a choisis pour enquêter l'ingérence étrangère, c'est des membres, des anciens membres de la Fondation Trudeau. Donc, des liens continus. C'est le même nom, la même fondation, le même frère, les mêmes enquêteurs. Il y a trop de liens pour dire que Justin Trudeau ne savait pas.
How much faith do you have in CSIS? How much faith do you have in CSIS?
The only way to answer that question is with a full public inquiry. We need to know how CSIS conducted itself and to what extent this has really been Justin Trudeau's failure. The only way to get to those answers is to have a full public inquiry.
If you're Prime Minister, would you take questions every Wednesday from the opposition leaders?
When I'm in town, I'll be taking questions.
So when you're not in town, does that mean you're not working?
Non, je ne comprends pas ce que vous dites, parce que quand je vois le premier ministre à New York pour parler aux célébrités, il ne travaille pas à ce moment-là. C'est vrai. Je l'accepte que le premier ministre doit aller ailleurs des fois, mais pour lui, c'est trop, là. C'est trop. Ça n'a pas de bon sens d'aller à New York en même temps qu'il y a une grève ici au Canada. 150 000 employés qui ne travaillent pas. 1 sur 5 Canadiens manquent des repas parce que les prix de nourriture est trop haut. Il y a une crise d'ingérence étrangère, une vague de criminalité. Il est à New York pour parler aux grands comédiens de Hollywood. C'est pas du travail, c'est des vacances. Merci beaucoup. Speaking of which. Oui, c'est les armes à feu.
Les amendements pour l'interdiction des armes d'assaut, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Il n'interdit pas des armes d'assaut. Il était en train d'interdire des armes d'épaule de grand-père Joe. Non. Justin Trudeau avoue qu'il ne sait même pas ce que c'est une arme d'assaut. Il veut interdire des chasseurs. C'est ça la réalité. Il a dit en haute voix. On a les citations sur les vidéos. Justin Trudeau veut bannir des Autochtones, des fermiers, des gens des régions de faire la chasse au lieu de cibler des vrais criminels et les trafiquants d'armes. Ça n'a pas de bon sens. Ce qui a de bon sens, c'est de renforcer nos frontières pour empêcher des armes trafiquées, c'est de mettre des criminels récidivistes en prison. C'est ça le gros bon sens et c'est ce que nous allons faire comme conservateurs. Well, so here's what we already know. The dictatorship in Beijing gave $140,000 to the Trudeau Foundation, according to an intercepted phone call involving a member of the Chinese consulate. The purpose of this donation was to influence Justin Trudeau. Sacha Trudeau signed on the dotted line, negotiated and recruited this donation. We want to know more about how this foreign dictatorship is influencing Trudeau and his family with money. And that's why he has to testify. It's time for the Prime Minister to end the vacation, get into the House of Commons and answer questions. And speaking of ending vacations, getting to work, I've got work to do. Thank you very much.
Thanks for stopping. Thank you.
Merci, le Président, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Council. My thanks to Switzerland for organizing this important debate. I'm speaking from Nairobi, where I attend the Chief Executive's Board after a visit to Addis and important discussions with the African Union. History offers us a warning, but also a way forward. The United Nations Charter aimed to future-proof the world against repetition, of the devastating wars, global recession, and imperialism that had preceded it. Shortly thereafter, states adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, underpinning the Charter and recognizing that the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Full compliance with human rights is the best antidote to the inequalities, unaddressed grievances, and exclusion, which are often at the root of instability and conflict. An unwavering human rights lens and strong human rights action based on norms tried and tested lead us away from chaos and conflict, advance development, and build trust. Trust, and we have heard it from the previous speaker, is the core of peaceful relations between and among human beings. It thrives on mutual respect and dependability, on truth, on justice, on fair and equal treatment. Trust is also the core of the social contract between people and the institutions of the state. People trust the authorities when they can be relied upon to advance their economic, social, civil, political, and cultural freedoms, their rights to development, and to deliver justice. Trust, no doubt, is the foundation of conflict prevention and of sustainable peace. It is indeed the comprehensive advancement of all human rights that builds trust. I have experienced this time and again when engaging with victims, with human rights defenders and refugees. It is their voices that human rights seeks to amplify and bring to the table. No surprise, therefore, that human rights are essential at every stage of the peace continuum. First, as this Council has acknowledged, the human rights lens provides early warning, and it also points to targeted preemptive action. Clear indicators are crucial to detecting the drivers of conflict and addressing them. My office is strengthening its work on human rights indicators and data in relation to peace and security, developing solid indicators on killings and violence against human rights defenders, civil society and media, as well as conflict-related deaths. This work also draws on accessing and analyzing open source information, for example, to track internet shutdowns and other issues of relevance to early warning. Let me take as an example the crisis in Haiti, where early warning signals pointed persistently to the profoundly destructive impact of inequalities, corruption, and instability. This Council acted last year in relation to Haiti with an arms embargo and targeted sanctions, among other responses. But more action is urgently needed now. I visited the country in February. It is dangling over an abyss. The state's lack of capacity to fulfill human rights has completely eroded people's confidence. The social contract has collapsed. The current lawlessness is a human rights emergency that calls for a robust response. There is an immediate need to support Haiti's institution by deploying a time-bound, specialized and human rights compliant support force with a comprehensive action plan. The longer-term challenge, of course, is to build robust institutions that deliver on human rights. Second, when conflict has broken out, the human rights perspective brings focus to the impact on people. Human rights monitoring based on reliable, objective information and analysis also helps to establish the facts. It serves to counter misinformation and narratives that foster hostility and fear. The value of human rights monitoring and reporting during and post-conflict is well recognized by this Council, including through the 11 human rights components in peace operations that you have mandated. The latest country to move towards full-blown conflict is Sudan. The human rights impact of the current fighting has been catastrophic. It's heartbreaking. On Monday, an airstrike by the Sudanese military reportedly hit the vicinity of a hospital in the East Nile area of Khartoum. The RSF has taken over numerous residential buildings in Khartoum to use as operational bases, launching attacks from densely inhabited urban areas. Civilians continue to be placed at acute risk and are prevented from accessing critical supplies and assistance. In short, the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution have been trampled by both parties, which I strongly condemn. Trust has been obliterated. We know that Sudan's future depends on building trust between the Sudanese people and the institutions that are supposed to serve them. Human rights, an end to impunity, and participation by the population, particularly women and young people, must be the driving forces out of the current crisis so that Sudan can stabilize at last. Let us not forget that in 2019, the people of Sudan rose up to claim their human rights and overthrow dictatorship, only to be dashed again by the October 21 military coup. Even then, people's hope wasn't crushed. When I visited Sudan in November last year, I was moved by their courage as they worked yet again to ensure a transition to civilian governance. There was no question about human rights being a foreign or elite concept. The universality and power of the call to freedom, equality, and justice was palpable. This makes the current situation all the more tragic. Third, the full range of human rights standards are equally crucial in bringing conflict to a close and establishing sustainable peace. In particular, the human rights principles of accountability, non-discrimination, and participation, meaningful participation, are essential to build and maintain trust among and between people and the state, in short, to sustain peace. Accountability addresses grievances, both through justice and the fight against impunity, and by promoting responsive and accountable governance, which serves people's real needs. Equality and non-discrimination tackle persistent inequalities, ensuring no one is left behind. This Council has witnessed how addressing discrimination against minorities and the disenfranchised can help heal and build more resilient societies. Participation in an open civic space, importantly by women and girls, by minority groups and by young people, builds deeper, broader trust in institutions. The Council has heard many powerful witnesses of the contributions that women bring to ending violence and building peace. Their diverse voices, freely raised, bring important perspectives into a peace process on key issues such as economic recovery, security and resources, issues that extend well beyond often the parties' focus on maximizing their grasp of power. Women must also participate in the implementation of peace agreements. Let me make a particular case on today's World Press Freedom Day for the importance of press freedom and the protection of journalists in nourishing accountable governance. More broadly, any restrictions on the civic space exacerbate exclusion, hampering efforts to build sustainable peace, and laying the seeds again for instability and unrest. By way of example, in Colombia, participation and other core human rights principles have been crucial to building trust. The Havana process included strong elements of dialogue and inclusion. These ensured that the 2016 agreements were not simply terms for a ceasefire between armed actors, but a comprehensive blueprint for long-lasting peace. In January this year, I observed the continuing efforts to make this a reality, including by addressing deep-rooted structural issues around land reform, discrimination, and inequality to advance social and economic progress. Countries that have undergone conflict or oppression have an enormous trust deficit stemming from the often atrocious violations committed. These harmful ruptures need to be repaired in a process that is often long and challenging. Transitional justice aims at increasing people's confidence in each other and in state institutions. In Colombia as elsewhere, human rights and justice will be the best guides on the longer road towards reconciliation and sustainable peace. Mr. President, as the United Nations prepares for the Summit of the Future, including a new agenda for peace, I hope this Council and all Member States will make effective use of the trust-building potential of human rights in addressing peace and security concerns. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Je remercie Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and especially in a day that is a day dedicated to you, journalists, the World Press Freedom Day. So happy World Press Freedom Day, which is actually tomorrow, as he just said, but we are having events and different discussions all over the world. I mean, the main event is taking place in the UN General Assembly Hall today, but we have more than 60 events in 60 different countries throughout the week. And here in New York, there are more than 40 off-site events that started actually yesterday, and they go all the way to Friday. So this year is a particularly special moment because it's the 30th anniversary of the proclamation by the UN General Assembly of May the 3rd as the World Press Freedom Day, following a recommendation of a major conference that took place in Namibia in 1991, where all the stakeholders discussing how to foster press freedom after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, came with this iconic declaration, the Windhoek 1991 declaration, underlining that our role, not only the United Nations system, but all the stakeholders, is the protection and promotion of a free, independent, and pluralistic media. So throughout those 30 years, we have been stimulating policies to try to guarantee those three pillars: the independence, the freedom, and the pluralism of the media. This year, there is also a coincidence of this 30th anniversary with the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the main thematic of the World Press Freedom Day in 2023 is freedom of expression as an enabler of all other human rights. So really the key message we want to discuss during all these different events that are taking place, including this one here at the UN headquarters, is the central idea that freedom of expression is at the same time an individual right, but is also a collective right. When a journalist is skilled in a particular city or in a particular region, is of course his or her right to freedom of expression that is being eliminated in the most cruel way, but is also the freedom of expression and freedom of information of their entire community that is being eliminated. And the element here that, of course, is obvious for you, journalists, it's not that obvious when we are defending freedom of expression, that freedom of expression is fundamental for the guarantee of other rights. So UNESCO is launching today special analysis based on VDEM data on how freedom of expression correlates very strongly with the protection not only of civil and political rights, which is maybe more obvious, but also with social and cultural rights. So basically, the correlations are as high as 0.81, which is really a high level of correlation. So basically what you can portray it, if you are an alien coming from another planet to Earth, and you want to decide where to live and you care about all the other rights, is a good idea to pick a country where freedom of expression is well protected, because the chances that you will be going to have good protections on education, health, mobility, not suffering other kinds of violence are very high according to this data that we are releasing today. So this is a positive aspect of what we are discussing, but of course, unfortunately, the key message is that freedom of expression is under attack everywhere. And freedom of expression in general, but press freedom in particular. So we released the global statistics last year that 85% of the world population have experienced a downsize in their freedom of expression in the last 5 years. So unfortunately, there is a tendency of going backwards on that. Last year, the data regarding the killings of journalists, according to the condemnations of the UNESCO Director General, have increased 50% compared to the previous years. So it's also an increase in the number of killings. There are particular problems, for instance, regarding the online harassment against women journalists. Our data shows that 73% of the women journalists we have interviewed for this particular research communicated they suffered online harassment in a way or another. of which 20% communicated that this online harassment had a consequence outside of the virtual world. We have also, and I'm almost finishing with the key different angles of these unfortunate attacks to freedom of expression. A recent UNESCO survey has shown attacks against journalists covering protests in 65 countries in all regions. We also have recently published data showing the misuse of the judicial system to harass journalists in all regions, with 160 UN member states still keeping freedom of expression under criminal codes, I mean defamation and other sorts of criminal typology that can actually lead to journalists' imprisonment, which is another indicator on the rise. And then in some regions of the world, we are witnessing this phenomena that is being known as SLAPs, strategic lawsuits against public participation. Again, a misuse of the judicial system trying to reduce press freedom. And then finally, two elements of this very complex puzzle of attacks against freedom of expression are the approval of very draconian regulation against press freedom, and some of them with the allegedly good intentions of countering disinformation, misinformation, or hate speech, but these legislations being drafted in very generic terms and not following the recommendations of the Universal System of Human Rights on these kind of regulations. So we have been monitoring legislation like that in at least 50 countries. And finally, with all this perfect storm of problems against press freedom, a huge element of economic challenges for the news media sector to survive all over the world. So in a nutshell, we have the usual sorts of attacks against press freedom, I mean physical attacks, killings, and attacks during covering of protests, then a rise on arbitrary detainment, but also together with new formats like online harassment, or the misuse of the judicial system, regulatory problems, and then the economic problems. So the basic challenge of this May 3rd, or this World Press Freedom Day, is how we can address these discussions also policy-wise. What can be done to revert this negative trend in these many angles. So I will stop here. This is what we are communicating this year, World Press Freedom Day. We also launched a global campaign that many newspapers and media outlets all over the world are reproducing. Just to mention a few: The Guardian, El País, Le Monde, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. They are all reproducing these campaigns throughout this week, many of them tomorrow, the World Press Freedom Day itself. And finally, tonight, we are going to announce the laureates of the UNESCO Guilherme World Press Freedom Prize. As you know, is the only press prize under the United Nations system. So tonight here in New York, 7:30, we will announce the laureates that were recommended by the International Independent Jury. Thanks.
Thanks very much. We'll now turn to the press. Yes, Edie.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of questions. First, why is the UN commemoration today and not tomorrow on World Press Freedom Day itself? I got asked this. Secondly, UNESCO is obviously engaged in trying to reverse all these negative trends that you've outlined, but so far things seem to be getting worse and not better. What else needs to be done to actually try and seriously reverse this trend of, among other things, disinformation, harassment, killings, to make a significant U-turn? Thank you.
Yes, please.
So thank you. So the question of why today and not tomorrow, the World Press Freedom Day historically is a multi-stakeholder celebration. We want to stimulate as different partners as possible. I mean, journalists, media outlets, governments interested in this discussion, and of course the civil society to commemorate this. So in order to really stimulate the different celebrations all over the world with different time zones, it was a strategy to kick off today. But for instance, tomorrow, only here in the city of New York, there are 45 different events all over the city with different perspectives of this. So today is, let's say, just the kicking off of a global movement to highlight the importance of press freedom. So no particular reason side of kicking off today and making sure that the entire week will be a World Press Freedom Day week, although, as you said, the official day is tomorrow. Regarding the other question, of course, I have underlined the bad news on the attacks, but if we look into a 30 years perspective when the day was first celebrated, we also have good news and we have things to celebrate thanks to the work of the several stakeholders, including the United Nations system. I can offer a few of them that are really meaningful. For instance, when the World Press Freedom Day was first celebrated, we had only 12 countries in this planet with freedom of information laws. Today, there are 135. So this huge structural transformation on transparency and access to information is not minor, and it was something really pushed by these efforts of the multilateral system in terms of enhancing press freedom. One of the big issues in terms of safety of journalists is actually the high levels of impunity in the crimes against journalists. But 10 years ago, when we started the UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalism, the issue of impunity, the impunity rate was 95%. So out of the 10 killings of journalists, 9.5 remained unresolved, with almost 100% of impunity rate. 10 years later, this statistic is 86%. So, of course, it's still absurd, but reducing impunity on homicides is a very challenging endeavor. So, considering that in 10 years was a reduction of 9 percentage points, it's not good news, but it's some indicator that something is happening there. And one of these elements is a strong engagement in the capacity building of judicial actors. So UNESCO has started 10 years ago with the UN Plan of Action an initiative called the Judges Initiative, which has already trained 25,000 judges and prosecutors from 160 countries in these issues of freedom of expression. And of course, fighting impunity is fundamental to get the legal operators involved, otherwise you can't move the needle. But that said, last year we commemorate in a conference in Vienna, or we marked the 10th anniversary of the UN plan. And it was a moment to take stock on how we are going on what we call the policies of the 3 Ps, prevention, protection, and prosecution of the crimes. So there are good news in the sense that there are, for instance, protection mechanisms established in relation to journalism in 50 countries, and this was really triggered with the approval of the UN plan 10 years ago. But you are right, there are much more to be done, and really the lessons learned in terms of where it's working is precisely when the policies are not only one of the Ps. If you have only prevention but without protection and prosecution, it makes a difference but not a significant difference. If you have only protection but without prosecution of the crimes, the cycle of violence continues. So the message from the UN system is precisely to implement the 3 Ps version. And I don't know if you saw the video of the Secretary General this morning on opening the event. He underlined again the importance of implementing the plan by all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks. Ivan?
We do need to address inequalities and ensure that human rights are always put forward. We do also need to protect the rights of those who call for our human rights to be protected. Our journalists and others who, using the written word or the spoken word to express and advocate for human rights and equality. We have the ability in very many countries to ensure that our elected officials actually take care of these things and ensure that human rights and inclusion are part of government policies. So, with that, we want to thank you for listening today, and please find that subscribe button wherever it is so that you can get more updates from us here at Depictions Media Radio and this particular show, Policy and Rights. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.